Welcome to Arc PhotoPod, the architectural photography podcast. My name is Jordan Powers. I'm an architectural photographer based in the Southeast United States. And in this episode, I'm sitting down with my good friend, Brian Berkowitz. Back in April 2023, Brian and I hosted a commercial and residential architectural photography workshop in Brooklyn, New York. And the day before, we got a chance to scout the commercial location. So we had some time on our hands. We figured let's sit down and do this podcast. So we sat down for about an hour and a half and talked a little bit about his background. Now, you guys may also know Brian as one of the co-hosts of the Shooting Spaces podcast. And if you've heard of that podcast and you've heard of Brian, you've probably heard a lot of his stories. So what I try to do in this episode is talk about some things that we don't normally talk about or that you don't normally hear him talking about in those episodes. So we get kind of deep in some areas, but we cover a pretty wide spectrum in this particular episode. So before we get into this episode, I just want to ask you a favor. If you could please subscribe on YouTube and also on the podcast, the audio version, if you're listening to this on audio. It would mean the world and it would really help me out. If you want to follow Brian on Instagram, you can do so at Brian Berko. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can do so at Jordan Powers without the vowels. Enjoy this episode with Brian Berkowitz. So the tables will turn. You're getting interviewed for a change.
Yes, it doesn't happen too often.
Yeah.
But
so we get to.
I don't mind it.
We get to dig into. What?
I said you get to lead a conversation.
Yeah, we get to dig into your background a little bit. All right, so everybody knows you at this point, I think. We talk several times a week, so I don't know what we talk about right now.
Nonsense, most of the
Nonsense. So we're
make fun of other photographers.
Could do that. We're in Brooklyn at 1 Willoughby Square. This is where we're going to be doing our workshop tomorrow, actually. We're here planning out what we're going to do tomorrow, getting all set up. You've been to this place like you said 5 times or the last 5 years?
Last dozens of times the last 5 years.
But you've been doing you've been shooting this place for a commercial real estate developer, or is it?
Yeah, commercial real estate client of mine. They own a couple of buildings throughout New York City.
Okay.
This is their first project from start to finish that they built from ground up. Their other buildings are all acquired over the last 40, 50 years.
And they're pretty much just leasing them out or selling them in most
Exactly.
cases.
There's, I think, 28, 30 floors here, and it's a regular office building.
By the way, you're gonna see somebody walking in the background from time to time. We've got Matthew Anderson here with us. For those watching on YouTube, he's here joining us today. So, yeah. So anyway, we're babysitting Matthew today. So you're just for people who don't know your background. You're a second generation photographer.
Yes.
You started back in the day helping your dad do weddings, right?
Yeah.
So talk about
early
that.
90s. I started doing weddings assistant back in the film days. For those coming from the wedding, I mean, I know you did weddings, but you were already digital by the time you did weddings. Yeah. So back in the 90s, late 90s, when you used to assist wedding photographers, there was, carrying a flash on a big pole with a battery pack, Lumidyne battery packs. I'm aging myself. We used to shoot.
Dude, 90% of the people watching this have no idea what that is. So
correct. That's what I said. I'm aging myself. Yeah. And we shot medium format film. So, but the medium format film, each film back would hold 24 images. So I'd have to have a film back on my pouch ready to go. So the second the photographer finished his 24th shot, he'd switch the film back and he'd be ready to keep going. And then while he was shooting, I was changing the film in the other back.
Did you? So you'd have multiple backs or multiple camera, or see, I don't really understand how those work. So you had the camera, and then you had the back to the camera.
Yeah,
this is where the film was.
Exactly, the cameras back then are similar to what we have now, but it was an actual camera body, a lens, and a back which held the film. Okay. They're all 3 different components. So the back come off. You put a little silver slide in, and you take the back off, and you can put a new back on. So the assistant was responsible for changing the film in the back while the photographer was shooting. Yeah. So when he finishes his 24 shots, or 12, depending on the type of back he was using, I'd hand it to him and be ready to go.
So you'd have 2 backs at every wedding, and then you just have to load it while one's being used, and then have it ready to go for when it's time to switch out?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then you were a kid at that point because we're close to the same age, but you were, what, 13, 12?
I was probably... when I went on my first wedding, probably around 10 or 11, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just coming with my dad to hang out and shoot at that point. But
did you ever actually? I know you were still a kid, but did you ever shoot with those did you ever shoot at that time? Not at a wedding, like for a job, but were you doing photography at all at any capacity?
No, but I mean, I did start shooting with those cameras towards the end, probably late 90s or early 2000s, as analog film was phasing out. I would finish off jobs. So the last set of dancing or whatever, I would come in and use those cameras to shoot as I was transitioning. But I never shot a full job portraits, bride and groom portraits, anything like that. Didn't film. That was I kind of just missed.
You basically just knew how to load the film, and that was pretty much it, or
no? But you had to do everything. So like when I would arrive at a wedding, the photographer would basically go in and shoot with the bride and groom while I set up everything, portrait lights and this and that. So you needed to understand exposure. You needed to understand what was going on. I needed to be able to foresee, because everything was prime lenses back then too. If the photographer was setting up for a family shot and he had 100 millimeter lens on, all right, I got to put on a 35 because he's doing a wide shot. So like the photographer just wants to be able to get to his camera and it's ready to go based on what was being done in front of him.
Yeah.
So
Stephen Carlish talked a little bit about, at the time we're recording this, I haven't released it, but he talked about his film days doing weddings. And we didn't go into depth about that process, but it's just like how separated we are from the film days. He was talking about how he's actually brought his old Fuji film camera, what the model was, but he still brings them to shoots from time to time just for fun, because like there's just a whole, and he actually pulled it out like in between, like while we were recording, not during the episode, but he showed me how it worked and everything. I was like, and there's something to be said about like the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
Like being able to actually, and I don't know if these medium format cameras had that shift functionality. I don't know anything about medium format.
I mean, it didn't have shift functionality, but it was an all manual camera. There was no electronics in it at all. I mean, you hit the shutter button, you have to crank to the next roll, and you hit the shutter button, you got to crank the film to the next shot. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've got like a Canon AE1, which isn't medium format, but it's like, I understand that, but like what he was showing me was like I don't even know, is it like a bezel or what's the, like on old medium format cameras, they have like it's like a paperish. I don't see. This is how incompetent I am. It looks like an accordion.
Oh,
like
okay, that's really old.
Yeah. Like, well, it's old, but it like.
So I was using, when I used to shoot, I used 2.25 film. So excuse me, it's much smaller film. It wasn't like 5x7 or 8x10 film. So.
Yeah, I think his was 4x5.
Okay. So I used to use 2.25, so it was a tiny little film. So the whole camera body was about this big.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it got me thinking about like maybe like actually holding that thing and messing with the knobs and just seeing how, like, because you actually have to move the camera or move the lens forward and back in order to get in focus.
Yeah.
Like that was fascinating.
I mean, there's a whole learning experience. Also, like with the medium format cameras, for instance, the 2.25 film, unless you have a reverse prism to like viewfinder, basically, you're looking down into the camera, everything is reverse.
Yeah.
So you have to learn to, compensate for that unless you're using a prism with a mirror that reflects everything back into
on the older ones, they were reverse and backwards or upside down.
Upside down, exactly.
Yeah. This one, he was showing me it was just a reverse image, which was still interesting. But like, just the amount of thought you had to put into photography back in those days. Like, I couldn't imagine shooting interiors with them, but like his challenge was kind of like, well, shoot your regular frame with then pull the film out and goof around with it. So I've had this AE1 that I've carried around with me, and from time to time I'll get it out. It just sits in my car. Yeah. From time to time I'll get it out and I'll fire off a couple frames, but
I want to go reacquire, because I don't have any of that stuff anymore. A medium format 2.25 Hasselblad, just to mess around with some of the fine art architecture stuff I'm doing. It'll be fun. But,
actually for your project that would be cool as well. If you just add that extra element, this is all film.
Yeah.
Then you'd have to figure out how to. Well, I guess digitally manipulate, it wouldn't be much different, really.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably get the film processed, scanned in digitally, and then you're doing everything else digital at that point.
For those people, there's probably a lot of people who don't know what we're talking about. Your personal project. So let's just talk about that a little bit. So you've got this personal project where you can talk about it, but where you've essentially
it's not. I mean, it's not a project. It's more of a hobby, I guess. Yeah. Because I do it a lot, and I come out with series now, but I just shoot fine art, black and white architecture.
Yeah, but it started as a personal project, didn't it? Because it was shortly after that.
It started during the pandemic.
Okay.
Which was shortly after PRRE, in 2019. So during the pandemic, 2020, I was still shooting a ton of commercial real estate here in New York City, and I was getting access to all this high-rise access to the buildings, and we weren't really working that much during the pandemic, so I had all this downtime. So when I was getting shoots, I was bringing, a 70 to 200 with me along to my shoots, and I was on the 30th floor, right next to the Chrysler Building, for instance, and I had this insane view. So I would always just, fire off a couple of shots, and I used to mess around with post, and now this turned into some black and white fine art architecture stuff.
Well, yeah, but even beyond that, you like started printing them and you're selling them.
I sell them as prints, and then I've done a couple series because I did a series in the Oculus because I had really incredible access to that. So I probably shot 50 or 60 shots, and I ended up releasing 15 of them as a series. So it's fun. It's a hobby. It's not. I'm not. Yeah. It's not my main source of income,
of
but
course,
it's
yeah. But you started doing a series where you were like. Talk about your layered ones, your 3D ones.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. And I haven't really pushed it as much as I should because it's a unique concept.
Yeah.
But I found this vendor that allows me to print on metal and acrylic. So what I've been doing is taking buildings and splitting them up into different layers and printing the layers of the building on different acrylics and molding them together in a way. So if you're looking at a print, it would be like 5 or 6 different pieces of acrylic and metal together. But if you look at it straight on, it looks like the full spectrum of the building. But if you look at it from the side or whatever, you can see that each piece of acrylic only has a part of the building.
Yeah.
So
I think
it's hard to explain.
Yeah, I haven't seen him in person yet, but I think
bring it tomorrow if I remember.
Yeah, you should actually if you remember. But I would imagine that looking at it straight on, you've got like if you're standing straight in front of it and you just like move left, it almost adds like a 3D effect.
Yeah.
To it.
It's a print. It's not 3D by any means.
I know, but I'm saying because it's layered.
Yeah,
you're gonna see some
depth. Yeah, exactly.
We kind of jumped right into your career now. Let's go back a little bit. So I don't know much about. I know pretty much I know a lot about you from like high school. We don't have to get into a lot of details, but high school till like now. But like, I guess you helped. You assisted your dad doing the weddings. Like, what was your career trajectory, if you even had one, up to that point? Or like, did you kind of stumble into photography because that was kind of like...
I was in photography for a while, growing up, as you know. But I actually went to film school for college.
Yeah.
So, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, I thought maybe work in movies like everyone else wants to do, maybe television. I wasn't positive. But I knew that I had enough of a photography education that if I wanted to pursue that, I had enough basic foundation to just growing up with it to go that way. So if I decided I wanted to go into film or video production or TV production, I had to learn that type of stuff. So I went to film school, all the while working at a wedding studio out here in Queens while I was in film, doing weddings and all that stuff to make money.
That was your own business, wasn't it?
No, I used to work for another studio while I was in college.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And then right out of college, I actually got a job as a retoucher at a design house in New York City who they were doing headshots and com cards and that type of promo material for actors and models and that type of stuff. So, and I was kind of their first hire in their new digital department. They were kind of transitioning from analog to digital. So they wanted somebody younger, and they hired me fresh out of college to kind of help them transition into this new digital space, which was pretty neat and was pretty fun. And I thought doing that with my experience and then maybe working with actors and models, if I did eventually decide I wanted to go into TV production, I was just making connections in the industry at that point. So I was doing that for about 3+ years and making a very good living doing that right out of college, to be honest. And then the market crashed in 2009. So I was a casualty of the mass layoffs.
Yeah.
And in December of 2008 is when I got laid off there.
Okay.
Which was about a month and a half after I got married, so that was fun.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that. Jeez.
Yeah.
But like going back to 2008, it's funny because that was like around that time we were just getting married, my wife and I, and 6-7 months later, we moved to Minnesota. So I was like still in the corporate world at that point, and we were doing weddings, shooting weddings at the time.
Both you and your wife?
Yeah,
Oh, nice.
shooting together. And so we moved to Minnesota, but we still were doing weddings in the background. And to me, I didn't even notice the market crash at all because I had a comfy corporate job that was relocating me to another state to help set up. But 6 months after we moved out there, the place I came from closed. So like the plan was to go to Minnesota temporarily and move back to Ohio where we are from, but because all the market, like they closed that center down.
It was kind of weird because, especially in like a position I was in where I was retouching, and I knew how many images I retouched, and the place charged per image retouch. So I knew how much money I was bringing the company in every day, and it was more than I was making. So I even said to the boss when he's like, "I have to let you go," I was like, "But I'm still making you money," you know. So, but it was just, it was one of those days. I think he let go 7 or 8 people that day, and it was a company of maybe 20. So it was a good percentage of the workforce that day.
But you were the first one doing digital?
I was the first one doing digital. Okay. In the 3 years I was there were 2 others at that point that were hired. So there were 3 of us, and I was the higher paid guy. So I was like, oh.
What kind of
looking back now is a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Well, what kind of retouching was it? Mostly just doing blemish
facial retouching.
And you said you were networking with some of the actors and models and everything, like directly. Would they contact you, or would the photographer contact you and like say let's do, like,
it was all through the
what
studio.
Did that world look like?
Yeah, the company I used to work for was one of the more well-known companies to produce actor and model headshots and com cards. They had an office here in the city, and they had an office in LA. So at the time, everyone was doing literally printed 8x10 headshots for actors. So now it's all digital, I would imagine. So we were one of the most well-known places. So I helped start their digital retouching department, where the actors would call and make an appointment, and they'd literally sit next to me like you and I here, and I'd retouch their image in front of them on the screen.
Did you have to learn Photoshop at that point? Like, were you already in Photoshop?
No, yeah, I was already in Photoshop, because when I was in college, I was working for that wedding studio in Queens.
Oh, yeah,
and that's when we started. I helped them transition from analog to digital at that point also. So that's when we started doing basic Photoshop. They were still shooting film and digital on their weddings. So they were in a transition. What the wedding studio was doing was they would shoot the portraits, the bride and groom portraits, and the ceremony on film, and then do the reception on digital, because they weren't yet ready to switch completely over to digital, and maybe digital at that point still wasn't where we were shooting on like 3 megapixel cameras then, which at the time was like, wow, but looking back, the 2.25 film was still so much better quality than those, the Fuji S1, for those of you who know that camera, is one of the first digital cameras ever. That's what we were using at the time. So the Fuji S1, I think, was 2-3 megapixel cameras. The 2.25 film was still better quality than those. So we weren't there yet with the portraits and the ceremony, but we were there with the reception.
So you got laid off from there. You had just gotten married. Then what? What did you do from there?
I called that wedding studio that I worked for while I was in college, and I said, I'm going to start shooting weddings again because I need money. I just got married. And started doing work for them. I called a buddy of mine who was dabbling in video production, and that's right around the time when the Canon Mark II video revolution came about. If you remember, that was 2008, 2009.
Yep.
And that was really getting big in the wedding industry for video. People were like, we don't use video cameras anymore. We can shoot video on the Mark II. It was the newest thing. So my buddy was dabbling in video production, and I had all the wedding contacts, and I said to him, why don't we learn to shoot wedding video? You have a video production background. I went to film school, and I have all the contacts from the wedding industry. Let's go in and let's go in and try to start doing wedding video, which is, I think we started that business in 2010 together, and our first full year was 2011. We did like 92 weddings.
Wow. And that was your first official business that you started?
No, well, I mean, while I was working at at the design house, I officially registered my business, and I used to take small jobs here and there, doing headshots for some of the clients that I met there, because they weren't a photography studio; they were just design and printing. So they didn't care who shot the actual work. So I would make a lot of contacts there and tell people I did headshots and this and that. So I would get work randomly here or there. But that was really it. Nothing really involved. Nothing as far as spaces was concerned. I didn't shoot that till much later, and nothing even in the wedding industry at that point. Yeah.
And then, so you started doing weddings. You did 90 in your first year.
Mostly all wholesale though.
Okay.
So I called a lot of my old wedding studio contacts and said, I'm doing wedding video. A lot of those studios didn't do video in-house. They would subcontract other video studios out to do it for them. So that's how we were able to get so much work within our first year, literally doing $250,000 in our first year, just by having other studios subcontract us out for their wedding video. So,
okay.
And I was literally shooting weddings and wedding video till 2018.
Yeah.
So it was a while while I was growing this career. Yeah.
And then eventually at some point how did the real estate, how did the spaces thing come about? I know the story, but just for the sake of...
My first spaces shoot ever was actually an interior design job, not real estate. And I got it through my contact at the wedding studio. So the owner of the wedding studio had a friend who was an interior designer and just finished redesigning her own house. And at the time, this must have been 2012, 13, when the whole HDR thing was blowing up with Photomatics and Trey Ratcliffe. Exactly. Trey Ratcliffe. What was the name? Stuck in Customs. Stuck in Customs. And it was the hottest thing ever. And I fell into that trap. And I was just doing HDR everything. And I even convinced the wedding studio, let's do some portraits of family, family portraits
in the future
in HDR. And we did it, and they loved it at the time. They were like, this is the coolest thing ever. Running a family. I was hold very still.
To take a side tangent quick, it's funny because I remember that period of time, and I do remember thinking, I can't put myself in that mindset again, but I can't pinpoint what it was. It was very cool at the time. It was it felt like you were getting more detail. They felt more real. I think a lot of it was Trey Ratcliffe was on all these podcasts promoting it, and his story was that he's blind in one eye. So to him, that's how things actually look.
Yeah.
Which,
whatever.
I don't believe it, but whatever. But I think it got me thinking. For some reason, I was thinking, this HDR looks more real.
Yes.
Do you remember thinking that?
Yeah, we all fell into that trap.
Yeah. But isn't that strange how it was no, it doesn't. I mean, we look at it in hindsight, it does not look real at all.
Well, I think part of that is because from post-production, we don't know what we know now.
Yeah.
And even from a shooting standpoint, if I take shooting spaces, for instance, a type of interior space, at the time, I didn't know how to properly shoot a space like that. So if I walked in with my camera and handheld it, the space might look great, but outside the windows were white.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, with this HDR thing, I can see outside and inside. That's revolutionary.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of us just fell into that trap, and I think it was new, and I think digital was only 10 years old at that point, give or take. So everything was happening so rapidly. I mean, it still is, but so rapidly at that point that things come out and it gets, it becomes newsworthy, and you just fall into that trap.
Well, I remember specific, and it's not so much the HDR; it was the tone mapping.
Yeah.
The tone mapping.
Tone mapping and exposure fusion.
And I remember the time too when people were starting to come up with their own phrasing for it, and they'd fake trademark it on their website. Do you remember that? Would the people do that in your area?
No, I don't remember.
I would see people creating fake names for HDR.
It's their style.
It's their style. They trademark some process, but all they did is run it. Anyway, side tangent. But again, I remember thinking at the time that oh yeah, this looks so real. And you look at those now, and it's I think clown vomit is what everybody calls it. It's the colors are really bad. The contrast, the micro contrast is really bad. But it makes me wonder now, we talk a lot about how we shoot, all natural light, or some people do all flash. It's are we going to look at how people are shooting spaces now in 5 to 10 years and look at it? Like I look at, and I like in the
Well, I
space
think it depends. There are still people now that shoot spaces in HDR and Photomatics.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah, or Infuse.
Yeah, Infuse, whatever, exactly. Yeah, but look, Infuse is significantly more realistic as far as the results.
It's very subtle.
As far as the results, it doesn't look like clown vomit, as you said. But
Right.
like, I mean, one of my first shoots ever was for a restaurant chain here in New York City called Bellucci's. I don't know if they're even around anymore. It was an Indian food chain. They had the 5 or 6 around New York City. And I got hired through a friend of mine to shoot all 5 of their locations. And I did the whole thing in HDR. And I didn't know what perspective correction is. And like, it was just awful. And, you know, it was an Indian restaurant, so the decor is very colorful, like a lot of colors, and it was just so bad, but they loved it.
Yeah.
And they were like, wow, these colors are so vivid. I'm like, I know. It was 2012. What did I know? You know?
Yeah.
And it's funny because it just popped up in my feed like a couple of days ago or weeks ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I delivered that. But, you know, we didn't know any better. So
It's funny because I shot a restaurant chain back then as well, and I did some of the shots with HDR, and same exact thing. It's like very, very dark restaurants with like bold reds and browns and stuff,
exactly.
like old school. And the photos look like crap, but they were just like floored.
Yeah.
Like, these are amazing. Like, you're an amazing photographer, and all I did was just HDR. I just didn't know any better, but it makes me wonder, you know, if, you know, in like 4 or 5 years, because right now everybody's either using flash or there's all different processes. Everybody has different things they do. Is there going to be something we look back on now? Obviously, we can't tell the future, but is there going to be something we look back on now that we're doing that's like questionable?
See, the thing is, I think there's so much that plays into it. Like, we thought it looked cool, but in the same sense, like, we weren't doing those jobs for clients that really cared.
Yeah.
You know, the type of clients that I have now and the type of clients that you have now, like, we couldn't deliver that to a client.
Yeah.
They'd be like, what the hell is this? And if that's the work we were putting out there on our website, they wouldn't hire us.
Yeah. Well,
I would gather.
if the price is right.
Maybe. So it's like, I think not only does your photography process get better over time, but I think your business acumen gets better over time, and so do your contacts and all that. So I think it's all, like, it all works together.
Yeah, I guess it's all speculative. Is there anything like you look back on like over the last 3 or 4 years that you're like, you know, you would do different now? I mean, obviously things change, but like I know my process personally has changed like 4 or 5 times in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way I shoot now, there's still a foundation in what I do now that has been there since I started with Photomatics, which, like we said, you know, shooting mostly available light. I think that foundation has always been with me. And even when I was shooting real estate and using flash, you know, I was doing like a flash ambient mix. So there's always that, you know, go get an ambient shot foundation, which was kind of ingrained into me because I started with shooting brackets for HDR, or for Photomatics, I should say. But besides for that, I mean, you know, it's just a gradual process like anything else. You're just learning more. You know, your business goes in places where you didn't expect or didn't know, which is my case with the work I'm doing now. But there's still that foundation there that's been like ingrained in me for the last 10 years that I've been doing this.
So going back to that then, so you were, so the first shoot was for interior designer, and then there's a story there somewhere where you had the birthday party shoot that came into play, and then that's how you met. That's how you started getting.
That's how I met this space, yeah. But before that, once I did that interior design shoot, I started doing some research online because I didn't even know that architectural photography existed, that was a thing, because I was just brought up in the wedding industry.
Yeah.
So like all I knew was wedding and portrait photographers. I didn't know anything else.
Same here.
And I knew there were commercial photographers, but you know,
you assumed it was like
products.
products,
Yeah,
cars.
Exactly. So I started looking into it, and I came across PFRE at the time, like everyone else, and I realized that there's a whole career that you can make out of this. So I started doing more and more research, and got into real estate photography at that point.
So yeah, but you got into real estate photography, but you didn't just start like, hey, I'm gonna start a real estate photography business and start marketing yourself, right? Like, it still came by, because where did the whole party come into play? Was that
That was after I was doing real estate photography.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah, I just started doing real estate photography, and I started learning and called all my old high school friends that were realtors now, and was like, "This is what I'm doing," and started slowly building a real estate photography business.
and you're doing everything photomatics at that
When I
point still?
started, no, because at that point already I started learning on PFRE. This is probably 2014, 15 maybe.
Okay.
So I think the flash ambient like technique was already kind of out there, and I started learning that, and it's kind of what I went with. So
Okay.
I started I started doing that.
How long were you doing that before you started in the commercial stuff? Was that a couple years yet, or?
Yeah, a couple of years. There were two major events that happened for me in my career for the commercial stuff. One, which you just mentioned, and another, which we can get to after if you want to hear about that. But the first one was, and it's funny because we're in this building now, one of my old wedding clients who, at the time, I mean, he was young at the time. He was probably 19 or 20. This is going back, 10 years. When I shot his wedding, I knew that his family owned a bunch of buildings in and around New York City, but didn't think anything of it. I just shot his wedding and moved on. And then he called me, or someone from his family called me and said, that's how I know how long ago it was. They said, we're having a 21st birthday party for him. For my contact here in this building. He was turning 21 at the time. And
Oh, so you shot his wedding?
I met him through the wedding industry. I didn't actually shoot his wedding.
Oh, okay.
No, I didn't actually shoot I shot one of his cousins' weddings.
Got it,
I met him through the wedding industry.
Got it.
And because he was only 18 or 19 at the time.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. But I met him through his family. I shot one of his family. I don't remember who, maybe a cousin or something's wedding. And then his family called me up. They said, we're having a birthday party for him at a club this was when I was still shooting events, but started dabbling in real estate. Do you want to go out and shoot his 21st birthday party? And it was I remember it. It was at a club in New York City from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. And I was right after I got married, I was like, I don't want to do this, but whatever. It was good money. I overcharged them, and they said okay. And I literally shot overnight for this kid at the time's 21st birthday party. Just a bunch of people just drinking their ass off.
How old were you at the time?
Probably 30, 32, give or take. But I was already past the go to a club all night and drink. I was done with that point in my life. So shot his birthday party, delivered the images, didn't even think of it, and probably 8 months passed. And he called me up and he goes, do you remember me? You shot my birthday party, whatever. I said, yes. So he said, do you do real estate photography? And I was like, that's actually what I recently started doing. He's like, well, my family owns a bunch of buildings in the city and we're looking for a new photographer to capture some of our stuff.
What happened to their old photographer? Or did they not have
I didn't think they had one, okay. This was, like I said, he was brought on, being the kid at the time to kind of bring everything, because things were run so old school at that point, to kind of bring everything where it should be in 2010, 12, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I guess it was 14 or 15 later at that point. So, all the main sites, like Zillow for residential, but all the different sites, LoopNet, for instance, which is kind of like the Zillow for commercial real estate, we're starting to get big and stuff here. So they wanted to get all their properties up there. So I went in and did the first job for them around then. And 8 years later, I mean, he's still one of my biggest clients. I shot for him last week. This is one of his buildings we're in right now. So,
and through that experience, what did you say the other big event was?
So the other big event...
Okay. We haven't even talked about that yet. I've heard these stories, so I'm trying to.
When I was shooting residential real estate exclusively back in about 2014, 15, 16, at the time Google came out with, I don't know if you remember this, a product called Google Business View.
Yeah.
Where you can go in and take 360 tours inside a business and add it to Google. And you had to apply and be approved as a Google photographer at the time to be to produce these things. So I applied. I thought it was a good way to make extra money as a real estate photographer and perhaps even expand my commercial network and reach. And at the time, they already had all their New York photographers locked up, so I couldn't get in. But somebody at Google made a very big mistake. And I'm going to call it a mistake and a stroke of luck for me, where they needed to find a new Google Business View photographer in Long Beach, California. And they Googled Long Beach, and I have a Long Beach about 5 miles from my house in New York.
Oh.
And I came up as one of the applicants for Long Beach because they put the wrong Long Beach into the system. And they called me and they said, we're looking for a photographer. All they said was, we're looking for a photographer in Long Beach. They didn't say California versus New York. Are you still interested? So I said, yes. I went through the entire application process, took the test, became a Google certified photographer. And when they had me filling out the profile for their online database, because you used to be able to go and find a database with a Google Business View photographer in your area, they were like, your zip code doesn't match Long Beach. And I'm like, I'm 5 miles from Long Beach. What are you talking about? And after they realized afterwards, they're like, we met Long Beach, California. And I was like, okay, I literally just went through your entire onboarding process and took a test and studied, like, now what? And they're like, all right, we'll make an exception for you because you already went through the process, even though we're not looking for New York photographers. And they actually added me to their New York database. So by a stroke of luck on my end and somebody's major mistake, I wonder if they got fired or not.
I've never heard this story before. That's interesting. Yeah.
So I got accepted into their Google Business View program by somebody searching the wrong Long Beach, New York.
Wow.
Or Long Beach. They were looking for someone in California and they came up with me. So I got onto their database and ended up getting a call from a major outdoor mall out here on Long Island to do some Google Business View for the mall. And the mall, essentially, it's a very high-end luxury mall out here on Long Island. All the stores are Chanel, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, that type of place. But they change their landscaping every season, 5 times a year, every season, and then they have a holiday at the end of the year. And they said, we want to have the most updated tour all the time on Google. So they're like, they wanted to find someone to do this Google Business View tour on the outdoor of their mall and add it to their Google listing every 3 months whenever they change the landscape, so that anybody that wanted to go see what their mall looked like would see the most current version. So this was probably 2016 or 17.
Wow.
So I started doing that for them, and I did it for probably about a year and a half, every 3 months. It was a great, consistent gig. I would literally wake up at like 6 a.m., and it's a big mall. It would take me like 2 hours with my little Sigma fisheye and Nodal Ninja lens, if you remember that.
I do, because I was doing it for Everyscape. I think Rich Baum was as well.
And literally just turning the camera, 90 degrees, and it was, I mean, Google, from the post-perspective process, Google had a great system because I would literally just upload all my images to them and they'd give me final products. But nevertheless, so I did that for a while. And then they knew I did photography also, but never did photography for them. But probably about mid-2017, my contact at the mall, who was the manager of marketing, the marketing manager, but was also doing their photography because she just enjoyed it. So I guess they didn't care. By a stroke of luck, she decided to move to Hawaii. So she called me up and said, you're willing to come in and have a meeting with me and the vice president of the entire conglomerate who owns that mall and a few others. I said, sure. So I came in and they told me she's moving to Hawaii and they want to have a photographer start working with them because she was leaving. And this was the end of 2017. They wanted to do a new campaign where they wanted to shoot every store in the mall. So everything was consistent, 65 stores.
So just pause really quick. So you were only shooting the exteriors at that point?
Up to that point, yeah. And I wasn't even shooting photography. It was shooting just the 360.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So,
and they knew you were doing interiors or
On the side, they knew I
Yes,
was,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
but they just didn't have a need for it at that point.
Got it.
So when they were in a position where they had a need for it, they said, okay, Brian knows us. He's been working with us. He knows the space.
Yeah.
Let's bring him in. So I had that meeting, and we shot this huge campaign at the end of 2017-18, where I literally did all 65 of their stores, which was my first dabble into retail.
Wow.
Yeah.
65 stores, and they're all luxury stores?
All luxury, yeah.
Wow. Do you keep any of those in your portfolio, or do you consider any of
Those
those?
original stores?
Yeah.
No, none of them are.
They weren't
at the point.
just not
At the
good?
time they were. Now they're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you don't have any of those you can recover, and like, I mean, did you just not shoot them very well at the time? Or?
Yeah. I didn't know what I was doing at the time. There are one or two of those stores in my portfolio now, but those were kind of like later on, maybe mid or end of 2018. So over the course of shooting 65 stores, I learned a lot. Obviously.
Yeah.
I do have, if you look at my retail portfolio online, I have an Armani store. That's one of the original that I shot in 2018 up there. I think there's one or two that are still up there. Yeah.
So this was 2016 to 2018 timeframe, right?
I mean, and all the while I'm still shooting residential real estate.
Yeah. At what point did commercials start to kind of take over?
It was around then. It was around that big campaign, those 65 stores, where I said I like this a lot more than being in people's houses.
Yeah, I remember, and we'll talk about shooting spaces, but there was a shooting spaces episode where I didn't realize at that point you were doing commercial, and you and Rich were talking about, because I think the episode was even about commercial real estate photography, and you were talking about shooting commercial, and I was kind of like, oh, I never even thought about shooting commercial. All I thought was residential real estate. So I remember that being kind of insightful, and it kind of put a little, I don't know, it kind of made me start thinking about like that a little bit more as well.
It's weird because when you think of real estate photography, you naturally think of residential.
Yeah.
And I got into commercial real estate photography by accident. As you know, I told the story.
Sounds like almost everything has happened by accident, except for the weddings and stuff. But everything in the real estate.
Yeah, you know, it's accident, a little bit of luck. I mean, you ever listen to the podcast How I Built This? Guy Raz.
Yeah, I have.
So it's actually a really cool podcast where he interviews the CEOs of all these companies. And one thing he asks on every podcast at the end, I don't know if you've heard this, is he said, how much of your success do you equate to luck or just working really hard? And, you know, I think it's honestly, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But there were things that happened in my career that were just pure luck. I'm not going to say there weren't. You know, if I give a slow timeline to the way things go now, because I mean, I didn't kind of finish, but to make a long story short, working for that mall ultimately led to my first job for Gucci. Because Gucci finished renovating the store. Their main photographer couldn't make it. They asked the mall who they use, and the mall recommended me, and that was my first shoot for Gucci, December of 2018. And you know, as you know, which we didn't talk about, 85% of my work is retail now.
Yeah, we'll get there.
So when you think about like how much luck plays into it, I mean, and the progress of what I had just explained, if that person at Google didn't make that mistake, you know, and call me for Long Beach, California instead of New York, like, I don't know if any of that would have happened.
Yeah.
So obviously I was, you know, working hard. I set myself up in a position where when those calls came in, I was able to do them. But, you know, if that person at Google never contacted me, I never took that Google Business View test, never passed it, never got on the database. The mall never called me, didn't shoot that campaign for the mall. They liked the images enough to recommend me to Gucci in December 2018. Like, it's all just like a progression of things that play into it. And that one person made a mistake at Gucci that changed my entire career.
Yeah.
And you don't even think about that until you break it down.
It's funny. I was literally just talking with Matthew about this last night. Similar story, you know, like one thing leads to another. And in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that was a thread of the conversation I had with Molly Rose as well. Like I just finished, and I told her this, but I just recently finished reading Outliers. Have you ever read that?
No, I never read it.
It's a really good book, but essentially it's if you had to summarize it, the way at least what I took from it was that like, you know, everything that happens to like people who are successful, most of the things happen because of circumstances. It's not because we're special necessarily. It's because, you know, we're right place, right time, having a high risk tolerance, et cetera. So I think, you know, you can say it was all accidental or whatever, partly luck, partly whatever. But I also think that you probably recognize patterns and opportunities that closely align with not only what you're interested in, but the way you kind of see things going. Because we talk about this stuff a lot. There's always new business ideas that we talk about and new opportunities. So like for you, you know, and you have to kind of put yourself back in that mindset, 2016, 2018. You didn't have the stable retail career at the time. You were still dabbling in residential, dabbling in commercial.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. How did you, I don't know, like when you were there any other opportunities that came along your way that maybe you missed out on, that like in hindsight, like, oh, I wonder what would have happened if I would have taken that path? I mean, can you think of anything that popped out at the time?
Nothing directly, because I was happy with the way my career was progressing. Look, at this time I was 5 years into my first ever. April 2013 was the first shoot that I did for that interior designer through the wedding client. So, you know, from April 2013 when I did that awful interior design.
So you're literally 10 years. This is your 10-year anniversary.
Yes, I never even realized that. Yeah, 10-year anniversary.
Yeah.
So from April 2013, right, when I shot that first interior design through Photomatics, which looked like garbage, to December 2018, which was my first shoot ever for Gucci. I mean, that's a small period of time to go from first ever shoot of garbage to shooting for one of the most recognizable global brands. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, so don't. I'm not trying to be like a douche over here.
You're not. Yeah.
But a lot of it happened really quickly.
Yeah.
And you know, as you know, in this industry, you can get very good very quickly. It's not hard. There's so much education out there. And you know, we're talking about circumstance. Everybody has circumstances.
Yeah.
Those situations pop up for everybody, but I think it's those people that realize it's a circumstance and take it, like you said, high risk tolerance.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are able to go to the next level.
Well, not only take it, but take it quickly. Like you don't have to sit around and analyze it for a couple of days. Like, you know, it's like you have it. It's like you're looking for those patterns.
Exactly.
And you can grab them when you see them.
Exactly. But I think those circumstances happen to everybody.
They do. Yeah.
But not everybody realizes, like, all right, a circumstance just fell into my lap. Let me go and grab it and not be scared, because like my thought process when Gucci reached out to me was like, and I knew they were going to reach out to me too, because my contact at the mall said, hey, we gave your number to some contacts at Gucci. And they reached out to me, and I was like, look, I'm going to go and try this. And if I fail, I fail. But like, I have to try it.
Right.
You know, because I don't think I can live with myself for the next however many years of my life if I say to myself, Gucci called and I didn't jump on that opportunity. And I said, I'd rather fail knowing that at least I tried, than just say to myself, I'm too scared to give it a go.
Did you, at the time, if you had to put yourself back there, when you were having those meetings or like facilitating those emails or calls, like, what was your pitch or presentation to them? Like were you kind of like a fake it till you make it kind of thing, or was it like?
I mean, I still feel like that a little bit.
But were you kind of upfront with them, like, hey, look, you know, like you just said, I'm going to try it?
Well,
like, what was your approach?
The good news
like?
With them specifically, I mean?
Yeah, just in general, like when these opportunities would come into your lap, like, how would you approach them? Were you approaching them with confidence, or was it more like, I don't know, I'm just curious as to
I mean,
what...
Gucci, for instance, was different because at that point I already had 60 plus retail stores under my belt. So, and they came from the mall, so the referral. So I think they had a little more confidence, and I had a little more confidence in the retail space because I shot dozens and dozens of them. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the fake it till you make it approach that I think I did on a lot of my first architectural shoots or interior design shoots, because, I mean, I think clients read off your confidence.
Yeah, I agree.
And you have to obviously take risks if you want to get bigger jobs and stuff like that. And if you're hesitant and you portray to your client that you don't 100% know what you're doing, they're not going to hire you.
Yeah.
So you have to go in there fully confident, knowing, you can knock this out of the park. And, I think their critique of your final images will be different if your initial confidence to them was better or worse.
Yeah.
Because they're making initial impressions of you during the first call they have.
Yeah.
And if you go in there showing confidence and saying you know what you're doing, then you can deliver the same image. But if they feel differently about you one way or the other, then those final images they're going to feel the same way one way or the other about those images.
So you have this. So Gucci called you. That was your first direct to client in the retail space. Otherwise,
Correct.
Before that, it was just in the mall.
So client, December 2018.
So December 2018, you shot for Gucci for the first time, and then like kind of what happened from there?
Then I just continued on with my real estate photography.
Yeah, but at that point you were slowly was it at that point you were slowly starting to step
after
away from
December of 2019, I didn't get my next retail job, minus the mall.
Yeah.
Till January of 2020.
But you were still doing commercial real estate.
I was still doing commercial real estate. Residential real estate, and trying to get bigger gigs when I can, architectural and design stuff.
And that was until 2020, and then the apocalypse came.
Correct. So January 2020, right before the apocalypse, was my second shoot for Gucci. After not hearing from them for a year, they called me and they said...
Oh, wait, no, we forgot about Rolex, because Rolex happened before.
That was after. That was
okay,
fall of 2020.
Okay.
January of 2020, or December of 2019, Gucci called and they were like, we haven't spoken to you in a while, sorry. We have a shoot in Toronto. You interested in going? That was my second shoot ever for Gucci, if you remember when I went to Toronto.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, you met up with Matt.
Yeah, exactly. So I went, I did that second shoot for them ever. It might have been one of my first travel shoots ever, if I remember correctly. And then, I did that. And like 6 weeks after I got back, the apocalypse happened, which for someone who shoots commercial real estate was a blessing in disguise for me.
Well, you didn't realize at the time, because
Correct.
Especially they shut down New York City, essentially. And then you had to get, if I'm not mistaken, you had to get like a waiver,
exactly.
essential worker or whatever. But yeah, so that kind of, even though you weren't shooting like architecture, like commercial, like it was like the floodgates open.
The floodgates open. I mean, 2020 was my best year to date, even better than, 21, 22.
Yeah.
Floodgates open. I probably shot 1.5 million square feet of commercial space in 2020 during the pandemic, in the heart of the pandemic, spring, summer that year.
Yeah, and just for some perspective, we're in like 3,500 square foot space here?
No. This is bigger. This is probably like 8,000.
8,000,
yeah.
Okay. So you shot, I'm not a mathematician, but you shot like 200 of these things. And you were also doing the Matterport stuff, so it was still very much real estate.
Yes, exactly. Very much real estate oriented.
But at that, I feel like at that point you were like, I remember a conversation I was having with you. You literally said, "I think I'm done with residential."
Yeah, it was around that time. It was probably around 2019 where I started doing more architectural and design work. And probably, I wonder, I can't pinpoint an exact time, but I wonder if it was probably around that time when Gucci called me back in December of that year and they said, we have another shoot for you. And I said, I need to stop doing this, this residential stuff for $150, $250 because there's so much more money out there for this other stuff.
Well, and it was also more aligned with your career trajectory. It was like you stay in real estate shooting the same thing over and over for the same amount of money, or you take the next step.
I don't have it in me to shoot 10, 15 properties a week. Like that hustle it's not for me.
Yeah.
It's just not for me.
Totally
look, it's like the age-old saying, would you rather shoot less and make more?
Would you consider yourself an architectural photographer? Like how, or are you like how do you label yourself these days? Or are you more?
That's what I tell people when they ask.
Okay.
Because how else am I going to label myself?
Well, I didn't know if you like just called yourself like mostly like a commercial
Yeah, no,
real
I say
estate
architectural photographer, even though retail makes up like 85% of my work now. But I'm not going to say I'm a retail photographer because do you shoot product? Do you shoot this? You know, so
I just wasn't sure if like because you know, I'm shooting a lot of commercial work these days as well. It's not retail, it's not commercial real estate. So like, I wasn't sure if you differentiated. I don't, but I wasn't sure if you did. If you still would consider yourself mostly commercial real estate, or
I'm doing less and less commercial real estate.
Yeah.
I mean, things changed once things got back to normal in New York City. So a lot of the in-person showings came back. Less of a need. My rates went up also, so that had to do with me losing a lot of my clients, which is okay because I made up for a lot of that in the retail side of things.
And then later on in 2020, so going back to the retail stuff, you get like the opportunity of a lifetime for for a photographer. Not a lifetime, but at least, you know.
I mean, it was an opportunity that I wasn't expecting, probably wasn't ready for, but...
You don't think so?
From a shooting perspective, I think I was ready for it.
Yeah.
But just from like a logistical standpoint, I don't know if but I made it happen.
Yeah.
But that was probably in July of 2020. So smack in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, New York City was shut down, and I got an email from Rolex that they were looking for a photographer to shoot. At the time, it was 13, I think 11 or 13 of their stores here on the Northeast. And I started doing a dance in my house. I was like, wow, 11 stores for Rolex, that's pretty big. And then as the conversations and negotiations progressed over about a month, and I didn't even know how to handle the scope of a job like that, because I was able to, like the Gucci retail stores were like one-off store. I was like, all right, you kind of know your day rate, you have an idea, but like, they wanted a better price because they were giving me so much volume, and I didn't even know where to go. And so I actually called Tony Roseland, who helped me sort of, I guess, bid and put together, like, not a bid financially, but the best way to approach it. Once the negotiations picked up, they changed the scope of that project from 13 to 47 stores across the entire Northeast. So I pretty much went as far west as Pittsburgh, as far south as Roanoke, Virginia, which is not too far from you, in North Carolina, and everywhere in between. I mean, I was as far north as Burlington, Vermont, which is right outside Canada.
Yeah.
So to just make a long story short, in August of 2020, I embarked on an 8-week trip. Not 8 weeks straight. It was every other week, because I do have a family and I had 3 kids at the time. I couldn't just pick up and leave for 8 weeks.
Oh, you only had 2 kids at the time.
Two kids. Did I say 3?
Yeah.
I had 2 kids at the time. Yeah. I couldn't just get up and, leave for 8 weeks. Yeah. So I worked out with Rolex to do every other week. So I'd be home for a week, then gone for a week. And that also helped me for my own business, because I couldn't tell my clients, sorry, you have to wait 3 months to book me, because that wouldn't have flied. I would have lost a lot of work. So I was on the road for a week, and then back home for a week doing my stuff local, and then on the road for a week and doing my stuff local. So
how did Rolex come about? Did they get your number or your contact information through Gucci? Did they find your website? Was that a Google search, or how did that come about?
I don't know the exact way they found me 100%, but I'm pretty sure it was through a referral. It might have been through a referral, because the way it works in these luxury retail spaces is, from what I'm learning now, there's high turnover. Yeah. And a lot of the employees go from one company to the other. Once you're, for instance, doing PR for Gucci, and you know what to do, if you want to leave, or layoffs, whatever, you can get a job at Louis doing PR. You know the luxury market. So there's a lot of turnover. And if I'm not mistaken, but I don't remember 100%, I think it was a referral from Gucci. Someone must have switched hands somewhere and came in there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, and I'm not going to have you explain the whole process, but you are getting hired by the PR representation for those companies.
Either the PR or VM department, which is visual merchandising.
Okay.
They're in charge of making sure that everything that a customer sees when they walk into a store is presented properly.
Okay. Now, I know because I shot one jewelry store that had a Rolex thing, but most of them are not Rolex stores necessarily. A lot of them are
authorized dealers.
And they've got a Rolex kiosk in there essentially.
I mean, Rolex does have Rolex boutiques, but most of them are in a jewelry store as an authorized retailer.
Now, I know that for those Rolex shoots, those were probably your more challenging ones because they have a very specific green and they also all have reflective surfaces. So you had to
I shot 47 stores.
Yeah.
So the first few were a learning progress. Now it's like cookie cutter for me. I probably shot 75 of them.
Right.
But yeah, they have a very particular green color on this, what they call the aqua wall. If you go into any jewelry store that's an authorized Rolex dealer, you'll see that aqua wall.
Yeah.
And it's just glossy as hell, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah, and it's a very specific green. Like it needs to be spot on.
Yeah, they're. I mean, if you know the Rolex colors, it's that green and the gold, and they're very particular about their colors.
Yeah,
have to be exact.
So you not only did you have this brand new opportunity, 47 shoots, you were presented a new challenge you had to kind of learn. But I honestly wonder if Rolex is probably the more difficult of all the. I don't want to say that. I don't want to make it as simple as that, but like
they are
probably the more difficult of the retail shoots you've done.
Yeah, they're the more difficult stores to shoot and in turn edit. Yeah, for sure.
So through that, you got like a 47 paid shoot, by the way, crash course on how to like pretty much master shoot a jewelry store, but also like, I mean, what other possible challenges could you have? I mean,
everything, mixed lighting.
Yeah, you had literally every kind of challenge. So it's like you can literally go into a retail store and oftentimes you're only given like 2 hours max, hour or two to like shoot as much as you can while you're in there and deliver like 5 to 12 images or something like that. Yeah. Right? So from there, you did all these Rolex shoots. What was the next? What kind of started happening?
Well, during that fall 2020 process, I essentially said to myself, I have to find a way to get more retail clients.
Yeah.
Because the money's there. I mean, like I said, 2020 was the best year I ever had. And that Rolex contract was the biggest contract I've ever had and probably will ever have in my career.
Maybe.
I mean, you never know, but like.
Well, we're getting there though, but you're making moves to like make that
Yeah. I mean, so at that point it was, I came back and we were still recovering from the pandemic. It wasn't, I guess, the end of 2020, early 2021, things were starting to pick up, but it wasn't, it's not where we were today. Things were a little better. And that's when I said, I want to figure out a way to get more retail clients. I didn't know at the time that like retail was where I want my career to go, and I want to be shooting exclusively retail, which is kind of where I am now. But I said I need more retail clients, so I just started hustling.
So because I know since then you've shot for Louis Vuitton, you've shot for Pandora.
I shoot for Louis, Pandora, Rolex, and Gucci consistently.
Yeah.
And then.
So what happened though? Did you're like you're saying before, like a contact got passed between the luxury brands and
that's how it was for Pandora actually, but for Louis and Zegna, for instance, Zegna, I got Pandora from Zegna, but they were just like straight up outreach hustle, like find the right person to speak to. Keep emailing people till you get to the right person.
Oh, so you proactively reached out to them?
Yeah, I found Louis. I got Louis on my own. I got Zegna on my own.
Got it.
I reached out to Zegna, and Zegna hired me for a shoot. And the director of PR of Zegna, coincidentally, and maybe luck, is best friends with the director of PR for Pandora.
Yeah.
So when Pandora needed a photographer,
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's funny the way things work, because I made my initial contact with the director of PR with Zegna, and we emailed back and forth, but I actually never did a shoot for Zegna at that point, and he gave my contact info to the director of PR at Pandora, And I actually probably did 10 Pandora shoots before Xenia finally hired me for my first Xenia shoot.
That's interesting.
So, yeah.
And then eventually World Spa.
So it just goes to show you, sometimes it's not about the work. It's about just the relationship building.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. I think most everything, I was talking with Matthew about this yesterday, I think eventually it's like the work isn't so much the photography you're doing, it's the brand that you're building. And that includes those relationships.
Yeah.
And then through that, World Spa came because I think they found you through Google, right? That wasn't a referral.
Correct. That was
but because you had this luxury portfolio that you're starting to build, like arguably, like I think, and I've told you this, I think World Spa is probably at least one of my favorite shoots you've ever done.
Yeah, it was
one
of my favorite
kind of
shoots to have done.
Yeah, like you had literally like every scenario, like difficult lighting conditions, like, but really cool design, really cool architecture. But it was kind of like, okay, let's take everything you've learned up to this point and give you like an amazing,
the most beautiful spot.
Yeah, the
in
most
Brooklyn,
beautiful. Yeah, exactly.
Not too far from here, actually.
Yeah. And again, I think that was like, for me at least, it was like, of the work I've seen of yours, probably one of my favorite shoots to date of yours.
I think the design plays into that too. So I don't want to take full credit.
It does, but I mean, in a space like that, and I, me, like I am fully. I'm not like a photographer fanboy. Like I think like a subject matter is 90% of it. But again, the colors that you had in there, like you had some difficult things that you had to deal with and make decisions on. So like, not to take too much credit away from that, I know the challenges I would have faced in that spot, and you had all these, you had all this experience with like the Rolex things you were doing, like dealing with light. There's like very few pieces of feedback I had when looking through those. Like they were all like, you nailed it on every single one of them. So,
Thank you.
I know. I'm just saying, like, I don't want to take too much credit away from you just because I know, like we're part of a group and we give each other feedback on like not all of our shoots, but a lot of our shoots. And, there's, I don't know, it's very few times when I'm not giving feedback on things, and you just didn't have many things on that. Anyway, all this to say, all the retail experience led to that. And after the World Spa shoot, you started, I feel like that's around the time when you're like, this is what I'm doing. Like, this is it. And commercial kind of became your side thing, because by that
the World Spa shoot was not so long ago. I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
The World Spa, we're in April now. The second day of World Spa was in January, so 3 months ago.
Yeah, but that's what
2 days. One was in November, and then one was 2 months later. Yeah.
But what I was getting at though is like, at this point, residential real estate is kind of non-existent except for like.
Yeah, I've literally 2 clients.
Yeah.
One which is in my neighborhood because they're easy.
Yeah.
And the other is because he's the owner of a brokerage with 900 agents.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to lose that contact.
And commercial real estate is you're still active in that, but it's almost kind of become a side thing.
Yeah.
At that point. So
retail is like 85% of my work now.
And so you've taken that and you're like, again, it was probably around the January, February timeframe. You're like, I think this is it. Like I'm gonna do this thing that you built, that you're starting to build right now, which is like a whole new business basically around retail photography.
That's my goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that at all? Are you comfortable talking?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it briefly. Like we're still in the initial stages of getting that going. But to make a long story short, after I said that like 5 times in this conversation.
It's okay.
Yeah. We after that Toronto shoot for Gucci in January of 2019, a few months later, they reached out because they were using one photographer at the time to shoot all their new store openings and pop-ups all over the country, and it was becoming overwhelming for him. And they said to me, we like working with you, we like your work. Are you interested in handling the entire east side of the United States for us? And obviously I was like, hell yeah. Hell yeah. That's definitely something I want to do. So obviously over the last 2-3 years, that just slowly built up. I mean, pretty much I handle I would guess, to make an invisible line, Mississippi East, for Gucci, and this other guy on the West Coast handles everything West, and sometimes just crossover if one of us are not available. And that's actually when I met this other. We've only met once actually in person, but that's when I started talking with this other photographer. His name is Pablo. He's out west, and he was doing all the West Coast stuff for Gucci, and he was doing everything prior to me. And he was getting overwhelmed. He was originally from New York. Then he moved out west, and he was just flying all over the place. Mm-hmm. So essentially, we decided together about, I don't know, maybe 3 months ago at this point, 4 months, to attempt and see if we can start this photo agency that specializes in retail spaces. Because
luxury retail space.
Yeah, luxury retail space. Well, it doesn't have to be luxury at this point. Any type of retail spaces.
Point, yeah.
But like, look, Nike, for instance, some people wouldn't consider Nike luxury, but if Nike calls me and says, we want to shoot some of our stores, I'm not going to say no.
Maybe reputable is like the right word.
I think, though, all of our contacts are in the luxury industry, which is why it's a good jumping off ground for us. I have a lot of my own clients. He has a lot of his own clients in the luxury space. And we thought that if we come at a lot of these brands from an agency perspective instead of a individual photographer, it might help us get in the door easily. And proof of that is right now I'm negotiating with Chanel, who I've never worked with before, and through a contact from Stephen Carlish. So I'll publicly thank him. He knew somebody in the visual merchandise department at Chanel, and he put me in touch with him. And I've been talking to her, and she doesn't have a say in the photography choosing,
right?
But she made the introduction for me.
Yeah.
And I think coming at a company like Chanel from an agency perspective, they take us a little more seriously that, hey, I'm just a photographer from New York and I shot a lot of retail spaces. Take a look. Yeah. Rather than say, hey, we're a retail agency. All we do is shoot retail spaces. What we're offering, does that interest you?
Yeah.
And I think the goal for us, there aren't many agencies out there. I don't think there are any that specializes in just the retail space. And I think our goal, meaning Pablo and I, who are doing this together, is to, in the long run, and this is the long-term future, not right now, is curate select photographers in different regions so the two of us can travel less, because we travel a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're traveling like every couple of weeks.
Yeah, right now it's actually slow, but I've been traveling 2 to 3 times a month, so it's draining. I have 3 kids. Yeah. And they're all under 8 and under.
And your wife works.
My wife works, so it's I want to try to cut that down in the long term. So the goal is to curate a select photographer, maybe in each region where.
Don't start DMing him.
No, not yet. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
But. See, Matthew's DMing me. He's like, I'm in Kansas City. So, first of all, it'll help cut our costs to these brands if they don't have to pay all this exorbitant travel fees to us.
Yeah. And you've got a system.
Exactly. So we would probably handle all the posts and the editing in-house, and
it would also eliminate the need for them to search outside of your company.
Because, look, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, I was in LA for Louis Vuitton, right? And they were opening a pop-up for a drop they did, and the same day they opened 8 different cities across the country.
Wow.
2 of them were actually in LA on their.
Oh, I remember you talking about that.
2 of them were in LA on their Beverly Hills location because they have a women and men's store across the street from each other. So I did both those stores, and they had 6 other openings. Miami, all the major cities, New York here. Unfortunately, they sent me to LA when they had an opening here, but whatever. And they handle the pre-production of those jobs and the producing of those jobs in-house. Like my contact there finds 8. They have a bunch of photographers they use now, but they have 8 photographers. They handle the logistics. Okay, this location Brian's going to. This is his start time. Here's the shot list. Here's the renders. And they do that 8 photographers.
Yeah.
So our concept is, why don't they just do that once with me?
One contact, you guys handle all of it.
And we can, and we're not set up logistically to handle, let's say, 8 jobs from a Louis yet. The goal is obviously soon.
Yeah.
But why do these people who are a PR department or visual merchandising have to deal with producing a photo shoot? That's not, their jobs are not, production producers. Their jobs are PR. So the concept is let them hire us and let us produce the shoots for you.
Yeah. That's so smart, man. I know we've talked no, I think it is. I mean, even if it, I can't see a downside to it. I mean, I'm sure there is, but like you're eliminating any kind of, you're adding a ton of value to them by eliminating a lot of work they have to do. And even if it does maybe increase the price a little bit, like it'll be worth it for them because you're saving them so much time and resources.
Sure.
With flights and travel and all the logistical planning. You guys have it all.
And these budgets these companies have for marketing is insane.
Yeah.
Like it's nuts.
Yeah. And then, that's only going to, and you've kind of modeled after similar types of businesses in that industry. So they're kind of used to, not necessarily these brands, but like the higher tiered, these higher end brands are used to working with agencies.
Yes, versus individual people.
Yeah, so you're adding some credibility just by doing
calling
that.
ourselves that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I found the whole thing pretty fascinating. I know we've talked in the past about doing like a collective of some sort.
Yeah.
Where we're kind of doing the same thing in the architectural space.
I mean, that's sort of
that's kind of what
it's going to be
is,
once we eventually have that curated team of photographers.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're not there yet, but eventually, if we have 10 or 15 photographers in different regions, we're sort of like a collective.
Yeah. I think that's really cool, man. I hope that works. I know it'll work out for you, but like I hope it takes off sooner than later because I don't know. One, I know you're going to contact me to handle the Southeast, but two, no, I just think it's a smart move. All right, so we haven't talked about the podcast yet, Shooting Spaces. I think that's how most people in our industry have heard of you up to this point, at least introduced to you. I know that's how I first interacted with you. When you guys, I remember there was a day you posted in the real estate photography Facebook groups that there's a new podcast, and I remember
that day. Wow.
I remember because the minute I saw it, because I was thinking about starting a real estate photography podcast, and I wasn't upset or anything. I was like, cool, I'm glad somebody's doing it. And I remember DMing you saying, hey, if you need any help or if you anything, let me know.
I don't remember that, but
you don't remember a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I remember DMing you and saying, hey, and we hadn't met before, but I was just like, hey, I did a podcast. I did like 125 episodes. Like, if you need any help, let me know.
Yeah.
Just because I wanted to be a part of it somehow, help you out if needed. And through that, you partnered up with Rich Baum, who most people know in the real estate photography world. And you guys have been doing that. That was 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah, February 2018 was the first episode.
Yeah, so that was
5 years.
That was shortly
175 episodes, give or take.
And that was shortly after you started doing the retail stuff, right?
That was probably right when I was finishing that big retail campaign.
Yeah. So what was obviously, you're a business, you have a business mindset. So the hope is to monetize eventually, but like, what was your driving factor in starting a podcast? Was it just something you wanted to?
Well, there was none, and I was into podcasts. And I mean, look, back in early 2018, there were a lot less podcasts than there are now.
Yeah.
So podcasts were still newer at that point at the time. I'm not gonna just lie to you and say that financial wasn't a goal in the long run.
You make those, but I'm just saying, going into something, it's something that's going to take years to.
Yeah, I mean, look,
we
did a year plus worth of episodes before we brought on our first sponsor because we needed a proof of concept before we asked people for money.
Yeah,
people needed to see numbers. So I wanted to start this podcast, and I was nobody in this industry. I was just some schmuck from Long Island, shooting residential real estate.
What month was it you guys started that?
February of 2018.
Okay.
So I had the idea at the end of 2017, and I reached out to Rich in December of 2017. He was actually on vacation, And I said to him, I have this idea for a podcast. I don't really know what I'm planning to do yet, but are you interested in coming on as my first guest? It's kind of how I approached him. And he replied back from Australia. He was in Australia on vacation at the time, saying, I was also thinking about doing a podcast. I'm not sure how sure it is or not, but nevertheless, he's like, you interested in, trying to do something together and seeing how it works out? So I said, all right, let's get on a mic and chat.
Yeah.
And if it sounds good, we'll release it. And if it doesn't, then whatever. It'll just go to the trash bin in my computer. And the rest is history.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was January 2019 when I was coming out to New York to do some work here and reached out to you, and we met. That was the first time we met, January 2019. We actually were in Brooklyn shooting. We're not going to tell the whole story of what happened with this, but we were shooting a design.
Was that in Brooklyn, that first house? I don't remember.
No, that was in Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
That's right. Sorry, we weren't in Brooklyn. That was Manhattan. We shot a couple bathrooms for a designer, and then we went and shot at that penthouse.
We can tell that story in episode 2 of this podcast once it's resolved.
Long story short, there's something happening from those images. We'll just leave it at that. Yeah, I don't know how much.
Related to copyright. That's it.
Yeah, there's a copyright thing happening, but I don't even know if we're supposed to talk about that at all or what the deal with that is.
I wouldn't say anything until it's resolved.
Okay. Anyway,
we can ask our attorney if we can.
Yeah, like how much about this can we share? Because we'd love to share everything. So I guess, are you open to talking about the future of the podcast or like what your plans are? Or?
I mean, I don't know necessarily the future.
Yeah.
I mean, we changed this year and to a different format. We released the first 170 episodes as regular episodes. And in January, we changed the format up a little where, first off, we record in front of a live audience. We limit it to 20. We usually get about 15 per episode. And those live audiences, they can't contribute video or audio-wise, but via chat and stuff, so they can ask questions. And we started literally answering questions towards the ends of the episodes. And it's a more roundtable format. So it's not... straight up interview like this, asking questions, but we try to make it a little more conversational where we have at least 2 guests, and next week we're recording our first episode with 3 guests. There's gonna be 5 of us. Just so it's more conversational and not back and forth. After 5 years of doing it, I feel like the conversations get a little deeper if they're more conversational versus what camera you're using.
Yeah.
How's the business where you're located geographically. So we decided to change it up, and we like it.
Not as deep as this, not like an hour and a half long or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean,
my life story.
Yeah. I don't know. I like this. As you know, I'm not doing many of these episodes. Like I have no long-term plans or monetization plans for this at all. Like I know I'm doing a lot of travel right now. I know I always meet up with. Yeah, I could do a tip jar. I always do. I always meet up with photographers when I'm in cities. So obviously, I was like, I knew I had like, I was going to at least be around like 10 photographers. I'm like, might as well set up these interviews. Okay. So I don't know. I there's a lot of work that goes into it, and the fact that you guys have done 175 episodes up to this point.
You hear that, Matthew? We made Jordan's top 10 list.
What was your worst episode, Jordan?
Of this, what I'm doing now. Probably the one with you. No, I'm kidding. No, every one of these episodes is different because it's like the people I'm talking with, different personalities.
Different
everyone has different stories, like different vibes. Matthew and I were just overly giggly last night, like much like little teenage girls. So anyway, I don't know where I was going with all this. So I don't know. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything else we didn't cover? I think we covered pretty much everything we possibly could. I don't know. We've talked so much, and we talk so much that it's like, I don't know. It's like I don't know what we haven't talked about at this point. I know we decided to do this workshop. We're going to be doing this tomorrow.
Yeah. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah.
This place is awesome.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I can't think of anything else to talk about, man. Let's just wrap this thing up.
Awesome.
I mean, yeah. Thanks for.
Let's go enjoy Brooklyn a little. Get
Yeah.
some Brooklyn lunch.
Yeah, some Sbarro.
Yeah.
We'll find a Sbarro somewhere.
Exactly. You're obsessed with Sparrow.
It's a joke.
Let's get you a New York bagel. How about that?
Okay, let's do it.